Good evening, and welcome to Sex Addiction in the News on Facebook Live, Fridays at 5, broadcasting from Seattle, Washington. I'm your host, Stacy Sprout, licensed therapist, certified sex addiction therapist, and author of the book Naked in Public, a memoir of recovery from sex addiction and other temporary insanities. That's my story of sexual recovery. Thank you for joining me this evening, and I welcome your comments and questions in the live feed. I created this broadcast because I'm passionate about destigmatizing the conversation about sex addiction, so those who are afflicted can get help now. This issue is deadly, and it destroys families and communities. And yet when people get into recovery and they get the help that they need, there's an incredible healing that can transform individuals, families, and communities. So I want to be talking about that so that we can focus on the solution. And when I published my book in 2015, I started searching for news out there about sex addiction. And what I noticed is there was very few stories, and the ones that I did find were mostly focused on criminal justice issues. And while that is a part of the story of sex addiction, sex offenses, it's not the main part, in my opinion. And so I felt like there needed to be a way of promoting stories that were more hopeful, offered solutions, and promoting resources for people. And so ever since the Me Too movement took place, I've noticed that the stories have quadrupled, I would say, the amount that I'm seeing out there. And so because of that, it felt like it's time to just get talking about what's going on, because I think people are more ready. It's a tough topic, but it's one that's honorable to talk about so that we can work on resolving it. So please join me in this week's show, looking at what the world is saying about sex addiction. This show's for anyone who's interested. And our headline this evening comes from Channel News Asia, International Edition, headline news. This was from Singapore on February 15th, 2018. And just an aside, I find most of the very best news about sex addiction, interventions, and recovery comes from outside the United States. So hopefully that trend will change, but for now, there's some amazing news happening all across the globe. And this is probably one of the top best stories I've ever seen. So I hope you like it.
Counseling centers said that they are seeing an increasing trend of younger clients aged 25 and below seeking help for sex and porn addiction. Now, according to psychologists, one main risk factor is the repeated exposure to internet pornography. Vimita Mohandas explains.
In 2015, We Care Community Services Center started offering its sex, porn, and love addictions therapy after they noticed that more people were inquiring about help for sexual addictions. Initially, those seeking help were above the age of 25. But as of this year, 1/5 of their clients are below 25 years old. Some of them struggle with intense and compulsive sexual thoughts and urges, while others are hooked on internet pornography or suffer a compulsive need to satisfy themselves sexually. According to counselors, almost all of their clients were exposed to internet porn.
Most of the time it would be, when you have a situation where parents, for example, may discover that actually, the child has been suffering pornography. They may discover a history of pornography sites on the handphone or on the laptop at home. And they're referred for help. Young people who actually grow up with social media, with digital media. And there's a lot of sexual content that's on media, basically on digital media, that is very, very easily available, very accessible. We have actually very many people who are just could be accessing sexual content on their handphone, and they could be sitting across you. at the dinner table or the meeting table, and no one is any wiser that actually the person is actually browsing sexual content at the same time that they are right there in front of you.
It's the same over at the Singapore Counseling Centre. 5 years ago, it saw about 3 clients a month below 25 years old. But now it sees about 15 such cases a month.
The Social and Family Development Ministry acknowledged that there are many individuals who are suffering from excessive or compulsive sexual behaviors. Now, counsellors also added that it's important for those who are struggling with these issues to seek help, as it could have adverse consequences when left untreated. For example, the time consumed while engaging in these activities could impact the other areas of their life negatively, such as their work, health, or relationships. And in some cases, this preoccupation with sex could actually result in them committing sexual offenses.
The Social and Family Development Ministry said there are several risk factors that may lead to sexual offending. These include a struggle with intimacy issues, a lack of coping skills to manage their sexual urges, and negative feelings like loneliness. Easy access to internet porn is also a reason why most of the sexual perpetrators they see start experimenting with sex at a younger age.
At this time and age, I think internet pornography is easily accessible and readily available. So many of the clients that we see, they don't have to buy hard copy magazines, sexual material, or they don't need like DVDs and all that. We have found is that many of the sexual perpetrators that we see start accessing porn at an earlier age. So they start experimenting with sexual acts and at earlier age as well. So I think repeated exposure to all this material, especially those that are deviant material, which is involving materials, involving sexual activity with children or coerced sexual acts, such as peeping or like touching people without their consent. This may lead to them developing deviant or atypical sexual interests.
Mavis recounted one example of a client, Daryl, who used to be a top performer in primary school. But as he was frequently bullied by his classmates, he became withdrawn and spent most of his time at home surfing the internet. At 13, he chanced upon internet pornography, and by 17, he was satisfying himself several times daily. But shortly after, he found it boring to watch porn online. He went on to enter female toilets to peep at strangers. This gave him greater sexual gratification, and he enjoyed the thrill of each voyeuristic act. In 2016, he was arrested for peeping offenses and was given a probation order. His psychologist, Mavis, said that this situation could have been avoided if he had sought treatment earlier.
The Social and Family Development Ministry said that it sees about 100 such referrals each year, with the majority of cases involving peeping, exposing, and taking upskirt photos. Of these, about 90% of them are assessed to need some form of treatment, which could range from individual to group therapy sessions aimed at enhancing their self-esteem and reducing their risk of reoffending. The ministry also noted that in the last 3 years, the sexual perpetrators who have been referred to them are getting younger, with about 45% of them aged 16 and below, and the youngest at just 12 years old.
For those who underwent the treatment programs, 80% of them demonstrated a reduction in the risk of sexual reoffending at the end of the treatment. Psychologists said that one way to help prevent youth from sexual offending is for parents to have open conversations with their children.
For most of the parents that I see, they haven't had any conversations with their kids about sex at all. Some of them said that they think the school will do it, they won't feel comfortable doing it themselves. So often, it's only after they have committed a sexual offense, then these parents see the need to start talking to the kids about sex and about goals.
Counsellors also added that the sexuality education program in schools also play an important role in helping the young develop healthy relationships with the opposite sex.
Yeah, 80%. That is a pretty amazing number of people who are helped through treatment. So I'm moved by that story. I just think what it would have been like if when I was struggling in my youth, if I had seen something on the news talking about the problem, would I have maybe gotten help earlier? So we're working on it. Our next story is an opinion on sex addiction, and it's from March 3rd, 2018 in the Deseret News, written by Michael Erickson, an attorney, and Janet Jacob Erickson, a scholar from BYU. This thought-provoking story is titled, "Time's Up for Hollywood's Sexual Addiction." And I'm going to read some excerpts from this article. It says, the vast majority of movies are written, directed, and produced by men. Of the top 100 grossing films of 2015, only 7.5% of directors were women. In these male-dominated movies, females were 3 times as likely to be cast with nudity, 29% versus 9.5% for men. The percentages are even higher for actresses in their teens, 41.2%, and 20s, 38.7%. Let those statistics sink in. For years, Hollywood moguls have defended nudity and sexual scenes in movies as art and reality. But there's a perverse reality behind this art when groups of middle-aged men require almost half of all teenage actresses, teenagers, to appear nude in their films. Hollywood's harassment spreads as these scenes are mass-distributed, reaching ubiquitously into public and private spaces where a highly sexualized vision of humanity is displayed and internalized, particularly by impressionable and sensation-seeking youth. Social scientists have long known that portrayal of smoking in movies encourage the same behavior in children. Similarly, studies find that adolescents exposed to sexual content in movies are more likely to have sex at younger ages, have more sexual partners, and engage in more risky sexual behaviors. Sexual harassment and assault are reaching staggering levels. In 2015, 1 in 4 college women reported having been sexually assaulted by force or when they were incapacitated. Although this cannot be blamed all on media, young adults, often fueled by alcohol and other drugs, are likely to model the sexual scripts they've consumed. And many who have internalized these scripts often feel powerless to say no to unwanted sexual behaviors, as evidenced by recent research on young women responding to sexting requests. If there was ever a time to confront Hollywood's addiction to objectification and sexualization, it's now. The writers go on to offer 4 strategies for how people can challenge the culture of objectification. First, believe that change is possible. In 1985, 68% of movies featured characters smoking. But a cultural shift in attitudes toward tobacco led to a steady decline. In 2010, that number had fallen to 21.4%. There's no reason a cultural shift in attitudes toward female objectification could not lead to similar changes in Hollywood. Second, don't tolerate secondhand exposure in inappropriate movies. Smoking was once common in public places, but people refused to tolerate secondhand smoke, and public exposure is now rare. The same can happen if we choose not to tolerate secondhand exposure to increasingly violent and sexualized movie content. Let businesses, including hotels and airlines, know when you don't approve of the movie content they're showing. And ask those around you to turn off inappropriate content with the same courtesy you'd ask someone to stop smoking next to you. Third, and this connects with the earlier story, make sure your children, if you have them, learn about human sexuality from you, not Hollywood. The majority of American adolescents between ages 14 and 16 report that media is their primary source of sexual information. That doesn't have to be the case. There are resources to help. And I'll post this story so you can take a look at those if you want. And fourth, ask public servants to get involved. In 2016, Utah declared pornography a public health crisis. It all began when a group of concerned women contacted their state senator. Public health campaigns have been employed to curtail smoking, drunk driving, and teen pregnancy. Ask your representatives to get involved with public health campaigns to warn of the risks of consuming media that objectifies and sexualizes women. Now, I haven't contacted my public servants at this point, but I do appreciate that these are all ideas that we could try if we wanted to change the culture and what was available. In a related story on Esquire.com, titled "Incest is the fastest growing trend in porn," so that is very concerning. Paul Wright, PhD of the Media School at Indiana University, says, "This latest trend is just a natural progression in our society's relationship with porn. As types of pornography that were less common in the past, for example, violence or this or that fetish, become more and more common and easily accessible, consumers get bored by them and need the extremity and deviance upped a notch to once again become aroused and excited. Few sexual acts are more extreme or deviant than incest." He's talking about the effect of a buildup of tolerance from the behavior and needing more and more to get the same effect, which is what we see in sexual addiction. Our next story involves a Christian family who finds help and healing in a program called Pure Life Ministries in Kentucky, started by a man who had his own sex addiction and went on to help others. Let's take a look. Oops.
Local wife and mother sharing a story of hope and healing today.
She and her husband struggled with some real challenges in their marriage, and medical reporter Liz Bonus joins us now with how they say you can overcome. Liz?
Hey guys, good evening once again. Not too long ago, as this subject has been in the news, we shared some stories about overcoming sexual addiction. We heard from guys who were willing to talk at that time, but tonight we hear from a wife and mother who says she knows the other side of that shame.
Can I spell your name right, Gwyneth?
You'd never know it when you see Aaron and Scott Wilson together now. But just a few years ago, after a long battle with infertility,
we got the most amazing news in the world that we were pregnant. And I was the happiest woman in the world, it felt like at the time. And then later on that evening, it went from the happiest day of our life to the hardest day.
The hardest day, Erin says, because on her husband's cell phone, she found shocking evidence of what he now admits was a sexual addiction.
The man of my dreams that I thought I married had this secret life that I had no idea about. Nobody knew about it.
Not sure what to do, Erin turned to Nate Dancer. He runs a faith-based residential treatment program in Williamstown, Kentucky. It is called Pure Life Ministries.
The program is 9 months in 2 phases.
We first introduced you to Nate a few months ago when he shared his own story of hope and healing from sexual addiction. He too started his journey to recovery here when
I realized I'm in trouble and I need divine help. And that's what I got.
It was comforting to know that they know how I feel and that they had hope and they were on the other side of it. And there was hope, and I wanted that.
I just remember the first night, laying in bed, in the bunk bed, I'm on the top, and I'm just looking up the ceiling. It's how did I get here?
Eventually, the program, which is only for men, invites wives and families to come visit here.
He was softer. He was broken. We both were. But God's moved in miraculous ways and put pieces together and heal hearts. That's what he's in the business of doing.
Both Aaron and Scott have learned sexual healing is a journey, not a destination. What they want us to know now?
The Lord takes you through a lot to heal, but it's worth every bit of it. And there was just nothing inside of me that believed I was going to be any different. I can just tell you from what has happened in my heart and my life that absolutely change can happen.
I never thought my marriage would end up that dark in just such a broken place, but I never thought that it could be redeemed and be restored and be made new like it is now. It is way better now. Our marriage now is way better than it ever was, even at the beginning.
Pretty amazing to hear that, isn't it?
Yeah.
That program is pretty reasonable. It's about $190 a week. Some are usually thousands per month. So they'll work with families who need counseling and financial assistance. We have a link for you at local12.com.
All right.
So nice to them to speak out like that.
You know,
That's
especially
tough.
hers. I felt like we had shared only
Yeah.
one side,
Yeah.
and we needed to hear her speak
Yeah.
and just say there is healing.
Yep, there is healing. It's such a privilege to get to work with people who are ready to heal. Yeah. So, and there's a lot of treatment programs out there for men and for women, and some are faith-based. Many are not. They're more based on psychological principles related to trauma, and some are both. Certainly, you can do some research. I've got a list of programs for women on my website, but there's lots of programs for men as well. So, our next story is a feature of LGBTQ and sex addiction, and I am highlighting the book Cruise Control: Understanding Sex Addiction in Gay Men, 2nd edition by Robert Weiss. And I will read the book description. A moment comes for every addict when the consequences are so great or the pain is so bad that the addict's life becomes out of control because of his or her behavior. Some are news-making moments, such as the public censure when a congressman, minister, general, or professional athlete is cited for unacceptable sexual behavior. For most people, those moments are followed by resolve to never do it again, but somehow after the promise is made, they often find themselves in the exact same location, doing something they vowed never to do again. That is addiction. And for some, this addiction is more difficult to diagnose than in others. Such is the case for gay men. For some gay men, fully committed to open sexual choices and experiences, modifying their sexual behavior and restricting their sexual freedoms is like going back in time and surrendering to homophobic attitudes often found in conservative culture. It just doesn't feel right. After all, the urban gay male culture surrounding him fully supports his sexual exploits as long as the sex is safe. And since gay male sex addicts may not discuss their sexual behavior even with good friends, nobody challenges them on their late-night exploits in unsafe places, their arrest record or brushes with the law, or potential health risks because of their behavior. The truth is, gay male sex addicts are not compulsively sexual because of their sexual orientation, but rather as a consequence of their individual psychological issues and biological predisposition toward addiction. This is exactly the same set of risk factors presented by straight male sex addicts. Unfortunately, for the gay sex addict, his increasingly destructive patterns of behavior take place against a cultural background of dramatically greater sexual and social freedoms than those enjoyed by his heterosexual peers. The single urban gay man who has problems with sex, alcohol, or drugs is in some way a prisoner of his own freedoms, having fewer cultural opportunities for self-examination and less cultural support for behavioral change than does the average heterosexual male. Finally, there is a resource that can help gay men determine if they are indeed a sex addict and whether or not they are willing to explore behavior change because of their sexual behavior. So, this is a must for anyone treating sex addiction, but anyone interested in the population of working with gay men, for gay men themselves, and just citizens in general who want to understand what does it mean to be a gay man in today's culture and struggle with compulsive sexuality. This week, I am featuring 2 stories on sex addiction prevention, but not about children, teens, or young adults at this point. Our first story is about interrupting the risk or cycle of sex addiction when it comes to the sex industry. Have you heard of Sex Workers Anonymous? Sex Workers Anonymous or SWA, is a 12-step fellowship of people who have found their way out of the sex industry, who offer experience, strength, and hope to those who want to do so also. Their telephone number is 702-488-1127, and they simply answer the phone, "Hello." Having had a spiritual awakening similar to what she later learned Bill Wilson, the founder of AA, and Jimmy Kinnan, the founder of NA, had also experienced, which led them to create their 12-step programs, Prostitutes Anonymous was founded by Jody Williams. That fellowship's name was later changed to Sex Workers Anonymous to be more inclusive. Because literally no other program has taken on addressing the needs of someone leaving any part of the sex industry for any reason, no one was excluded for calling SWA for help, whatever the situation. This included men, women, transgender people, and the LGBT community, those who were drug addicts or those who were not, those who had pimps, those who did not, as well as sex trafficking victims. With Sex Workers Anonymous, it also didn't matter if the person was working in legal or illegal parts of the sex industry, doesn't matter, or if it was prostitution, porn, stripping, and or even management. The program works with madams and pimps as well as club owners and even producers of porn. All are equally affected by the industry, and according to the website of Sex Workers Anonymous, all are equally welcome to help. Just as Narcotics Anonymous does not separate out those who use street drugs versus celebrities getting prescriptions from high-priced doctors, nor does AA make any distinction between someone who bottomed out in an alley over someone who went to the Betty Ford Center. Sex Workers Anonymous is a program designed for anyone wanting help for any reason to exit the sex industry as a whole. So you can see where sex addiction prevention can take place if people can be reached who are suffering from sex addiction in the sex industry, and they can get help. More information at sexworkersanonymous.org. Our second sex addiction prevention story involves the Sexual Recovery Fellowship called Sex Addicts Anonymous and their outreach to sex addicts behind bars to carry a message of hope via letter writing. What about preventing new or repeat sex offenses through stopping the addictive cycle for those who are in prison now before they get released? This 12-step sexual recovery main office receives regular requests from prisoners around the United States for support and instruction about how to heal from sexual addiction. This fellowship has responded by starting a program to try to help sexually addicted prisoners by contacting them via letter writing to those already successful in their sexual recovery. One man who is involved in this program says, with the lack of meetings in most of our penal institutions, he's talking about 12-step sexual recovery meetings, this is likely the only opportunity for a prisoner to begin the work of recovery in a program we know has worked for us. He said, I myself write to several prisoners, and every one of them has been most grateful for the hope and healing this work brings. The demand generally exceeds the supply and is really so easy and rewarding and an invaluable service. Here in my state, I was invited into the sex offender unit for one of our men's prisons to talk to the staff about 30 inmates about sex addiction, the SAA program of recovery, and possibilities of having regular support meetings with the prison, facilitated by myself, this man, and other local members, as well as providing the support of our local meetings when they get out of prison. Their interest, questions, and enthusiasm were so powerful. So I love that story of lay people reaching out to people who are struggling in the sex industry, in prison, trying to heal from sexual compulsivity and finding a welcoming circle of people where they can talk about what's going on and be supported to find strategies for healing and breaking those patterns. More information available at saa-recovery.org. Our sex addiction book of the week comes to us. It's written by Sam Louie, a licensed certified sex addiction psychotherapist, and Sam is from my home state of Washington, USA. From the book description, this book is called Asian Honor: Overcoming the Culture of Silence. From the book description, many Asians are drowning in shame and addictions with no way out. Is this any different from a traditional Westerner? Very much so. Shame and honor are embedded in the Asian way of thinking, behaving, and interacting. If you do not understand the cultural history of honor and shame and its underpinnings, then you will have a hard time understanding the mindset of Asians, let alone the stranglehold of shame that keeps many from breaking the code of silence. This is a very important book. It's absolutely groundbreaking in our field because many of the stories of sex addiction are centered around the most common demographic in terms of what we see when we research sex addiction, which tends to be white. There's research on college students, but also research on older professional white males, higher education. That's what we see. But the truth is sex addiction affects people across the world and different ages. And so it's very important for them to have resources that are dedicated to their experience. And that's what Sam has done with Asian Honor. He also wrote a book called Asian Shame and Addiction: Suffering in Silence. So I recommend both of those books. Sam is a public speaker, and he also writes a blog on Psychology Today called Minority Report: Candid Conversations on Race, Culture, and Therapy. Thank you, Sam, for this vital resource for our field. So, as we're winding down, thank you so much for your time tonight, and I am seeking stories. Sex Addiction in the News is always looking for stories about sex addiction and hope for recovery in the public media to feature on my show. I had one viewer send a link to an amazing story that's going to be next week's headline news, so I'm very excited about that. Thank you, DJ. And if you see a story you think is appropriate, you can message it to me on Facebook or send me an email at nakedinpublicnews@gmail.com. Together, we can get the word out about what the world is saying about sex addiction. So that's all our news tonight. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's show. Next week, I might try to respond to something on the live feed. We'll see how well I can do with multitasking. But until then, I leave you with this. May you feel loved, may you feel cherished, and may you love and cherish others. I'm Stacy Sprout, signing off for Sex Addiction in the News. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you. Aw, I see those hearts. Thanks, friends. Thank you so much. That is really, really moving to see the responses of support. Yeah, thank you. Have a great week. Bye.